Hari. Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinda Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay, give me a second here. 26. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Now just to confirm, text 17, is it not? Pretty sure we didn't read that one. Yeah, I remember Dvabimal Purushal, that's for sure.
No, we did 7
I'm sorry?
We did Nityo.
Oh, Nityo Natyanam, of course. Thank you for reminding. Okay. Okay. On this 26th day of April 2023 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 15 entitled The Yoga of the Supreme Person, reading text 18 on page 611. Hi, Volji. Yasmat Charam Atitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Ato Asmi Loke Verecha Pratitah Purushottamaha Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Verecha Patita Purushottamaha Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Verecha Patita Purushottamaha Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Verecha Patita Purushottamaha. Francisco, you want to try? No? Okay, all right. It's all right. All right, you're on. Brajamandalu. Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Virecha Parisha Purushottamaha. Go ahead. Akshat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Vedecha Patita Purushottamaha. Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Vedecha Patitak Purushottamaha. Anyone on this side? Go ahead. Lock the ball.
Alright, Yasmat Kasaram Atitoham
Yasmat Chadamatitoham
Aksarad Apichotamaha
Aksharad Apichotamaha
Atoshmi Loke Vedecha
Atosmi Loke Vedecha
Pratita Purushottahama.
Patita Purushottamaha. You ready, Gene? Yasmat Chadamatitoham Aksharad Apichotamaha Atosmi Loke Vedecha Patita Purushottamaha. Patita Purushottamaha. Good. Very good. Yasmat, because Chadam, to the fallible, Atitaha, transcendental, Aham, I am, Akshadat, beyond the infallible, Api also, Cha, and Uttamaha, the best. Ataha, therefore, Asmi, I am, Loke, in the world, Vede, in the Vedic literature, Cha, and Pratitaha, celebrated, Purusha Uttamaha, as the Supreme Personality. Because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. Purport. No one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, neither the conditioned soul nor the liberated soul. He is therefore the greatest of personalities. Now it is clear here that the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are individuals. The difference is that the living entities, either in the conditioned state or in the liberated state, cannot surpass in quantity the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is incorrect to think of the Supreme Lord and the living entities as being on the same level or equal in all respects. There is always the question of superiority and inferiority between their personalities. The word Uttama is very significant. No one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word Loke signifies, quote, in the Paurusha Agama, the Smriti scriptures. As confirmed in the Nirukti dictionary, Lokyate Vedarto Nena. The purpose of the Vedas is explained by the Smriti scriptures. Now I have to here interject a little editorial observation. Hare Krishna. Maybe one of the ladies can go outside and request them to move a little farther away, or maybe we can go into the lounge. I can give them the key. I have the key. Now there's a deal. There's a proposal they can't refuse. All right. I have the key. And there it is. It says KL, Krishna Lounge. Okay, my observation. Now, here it says, the word Loke signifies in the Purusha Agama, the Smriti scriptures. As confirmed in the Nirukti dictionary, Lokyate Vedarto Nena. The purpose of the Vedas is explained by the Smriti scriptures. Now, if you go into the Oxford English Dictionary, which gives a lot of the old English usages that Prabhupada learned when he learned English, the word purport and the word purpose are often interchangeable. You can use the word, often used the word purpose to mean purport, which means meaning. And here I think that's what's going on. The meaning of the Vedas is explained in the Smriti scriptures. It could be the purpose, but I think that's what dictionaries do. They give you the meaning, isn't it? All right, I'm going to research that further, and I'll let you know the result of my research. The Supreme Lord, in his localized aspect of Paramatma, is also described in the Vedas themselves. The following verse appears in the Vedas, Chandogya Upanishad 8.12.3. Tavad esha samprasado smach charirat samutaya padam jyoti rupam sampadya svena rupen abhinispadyate. So uttama purushaha. The Supersoul coming out of the body enters the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. Then in his form he remains in his spiritual identity. That Supreme is called the Supreme Personality. Close quote. This means that the Supreme Personality is exhibiting and diffusing his spiritual effulgence, which is the ultimate illumination. That Supreme Personality also has a localized aspect as the Paramatma. By incarnating himself as the son of Satyavati and Parashara, he explains the Vedic knowledge as Vyasadeva. Om Jnana Timarandrasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Shri Parampara. Okay, just one little note on the content of the Bhagavad Gita as a whole and these purports. Now you'll often find, I'm sure if you read the Bhagavad Gita through, that there are many quotes from the different shastras in the purports of the Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes they're rather lengthy, they're not so easy to chant, as you probably noticed. And what these are mostly gleaned from the commentary of Baladev Vidyabhushan. If you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, and I mean the very beginning, you'll find the dedication page on the title page, right after the title page, in which he dedicates this book to Baladev Vidyabhushan. Now, first of all, the name Vidyabhushan is not his given name. That is an honorific, meaning like, Alexander the Great. We're not just talking about Alexander, we're Alexander the Great. And then, he's a historic figure, describes him. So Vidyabhushan means he who has the decoration of knowledge. In other words, it means he's a great scholar. He was the prime disciple of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who was a very famous successor to the six Goswamis and wrote many wonderful things, many songs we have. The Mangalarchik song, Gurvashtaka, he wrote that. But Baladev was his prime disciple, And just a little background. Generally speaking, we're one of the main, belong to one of the main four sampradayas. Sampradayas is a disciplic succession. One begins with Brahma, which is the one we're part of, Brahma Sampradaya. And there's a very prominent member is Madhvacharya. So he's also part of the name. And of course, Lord Chaitanya. So the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. And then there's another one that begins with Lakshmi Devi called the Sri Sampradaya. And that's Ramanujacharya, who's a very famous, you may have heard of him. And many of his teachings correspond with the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And then there's the Rudra Sampradaya, that's Lord Shiva. And then the Kumara Sampradaya, these four Kumaras. There are the four authorized Sampradayas. So, generally speaking, to be an authorized Sampradaya, you have to write a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And Ramanuja did that, Madhvacharya did that, and I think Nimbarka, all the others have it. But in Lord Chaitanya's Sampradaya, he didn't feel the need to do that because he felt that the Srimad Bhagavatam was the natural commentary on the Brahma Sutra by the same author, who knows better what the original book means than the one who wrote it. So that Vedavyasa. But later on, after Lord Chaitanya's disappearance, there arose some controversy in the Mahants, the priests in Jayapur. The Govinda deity had decamped there because there was threat in Vrindavan. This is the Lord Rupa Goswami's deity, Govinda, Radha Govinda. And so they were decamped at Jayapur. Now, why is it called Jayapur? Because it's surrounded by mountains. They couldn't conquer it. It was, they were able to defend that. That was never conquered by the Muslims. So the deities were safe there. So they took the deities there. And time passed, and then the Mahants there, they said, well, the presence of Radha on the altar was revolutionary. Oftentimes they'll only have Krishna on the altar earlier. So that was one thing, because they would know they're not married. That's the thing they were complaining. And on the top of that, you don't have a commentary to the Brahma Sutra, the Vedanta Sutra. Therefore, we're doubtful about this sampradaya. So in order to defend that, they said, well, we have to have a commentary on the Brahma Sutra. And so they wanted Vishwanath Chakravarti to write it, but by that time he was very elderly, he was too old. He asked his prime disciple, Baladeva Vidyabhushan, to write it because he was full of learning. And he went there and he prayed for 3 days at the feet of the deity, Govinda deity, to be inspired to write it. And then I think the garland fell down or something, and he felt, okay, this isn't even going to be my commentary, it's Govinda's commentary. So he called it the Govinda Bhashya. Bhashya is his commentary. And we have that in our line now, and that's available if you're interested. We have the translation. So just to let you know, when you see all these quotes, Prabhupada felt this would lend it. First of all, he relied a lot on that commentary for the Bhagavad Gita that Baladev wrote, which has been translated by Bhanu Swami. If you're interested in that, I can provide it to you. And he followed it because he felt these quotes would give it more weight, that this would be more authoritative, for the scholars to say, oh, this is supported by these lengthy quotes. Especially those 4 verses, 8, 9, 10, 11, which are considered to be the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. Extensive quoting there in the purports to support the points. So I thought I'd let you know that you'd be interested. Now, one thing I found that was interesting about this is that in this previous verse, I think I mentioned this once, but some of you weren't here. What does Krishna say? He's talking about the Uttama Purusha. This whole chapter is called Purushottam Yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person, right? So now he's talking, after all the thing with the upside-down banyan tree and the Mame Vangsho, and everything is described, now he's coming to the climax of the chapter. It's only 20 verses, we're almost through the chapter. So he's speaking about that Uttama Purusha. But in the 17, he's speaking in the third person. Besides these two, you remember the Akshara and the Kshara. The Kshara are those who can fall and have fallen. We're Kshara. And the Akshara, living entities, are those who stay in the spiritual world. Kshara means to be separated, or fallible, as Prabhupada said, fallable. They can fall. So there's two types of living entities. And then he said, besides these two, there's another one, Uttama Purushas Tvanya, Paramatma, who's known as the Paramatma. He's speaking in the third person. Isn't he the Paramatma? Next verse. Yeah, because I am transcendental, I am known as that Purushottama. So Krishna does this a lot. He's talking about you should surrender. Ishvara, what is that? Prabhupada quotes this verse all the time. Ishvarak Savabhutanam Ridesheo Dunatishati. Right, Krishna's in the 18th chapter. It's also about the super soul. Ishvarak Savabhut. In every living entity, there's the Ishvara, the supreme controller, situated in the heart. And he accompanies the souls as they wander around, the different bodies, He. That's me. Ishvara. Anyway, it's an interesting phenomenon. So now he's identifying now, yes, I am that Supreme Person, beyond both the fallible and the infallible. So I pointed this out yesterday. It makes perfect sense. You look at this word, and it means, obvious what it means, fallible. You can fall. Krishna can't fall, right? He can't fall from the spiritual world. So his name is Achyuta. And he's also Akshara, because that's another way of putting it. So that's generally what Prabhupada means by, we pronounce it fallible, but he pronounced it fallible, which is, that's what he means here. That's what it means in the Sanskrit. Yasma achitoham akshara baichotama. And so I am celebrated in this world and in the Vedic literature as the Purushottama. It's another word for Paramatma, the Supreme Person. So we're finally getting to the climax of the chapter, the last three verses here. And Krishna will be speaking about this Purusha Uttama for the rest of the chapter. Now if we go back to the beginning of the chapter, how did it start? We had this description, remember, of the upside-down banyan tree. And we've been wandering around this reflective tree, which is it's interesting. Right away, where do you find such a tree? Okay, you can see it if there's a nice, calm lake, and on the other side is a big tree, and you look down in the lake, and it's reflected there, right? And the root is up, and the branches are down. And so, but it's just a reflection. It's not a real tree, right? Obviously. So this is such a perfectly constructed reflection of the material world that it seems completely real. But it has the quality of a dream. I'm going to keep quoting this verse, which is Arteya vidyamanepi sangsrutir nanavartate dhyayato vishayanasya swapne nartagamoyata. Swapne means the dream. In truth, samsara is unreal because it involves the temporary interaction of the material world. But the miseries of samsara, namely birth, old age, disease, and death, you have to continue suffering as long as you are absorbed in trying to enjoy the material senses. Dhyayado vishayanasya. Now that phrase, hopefully, at one point will kick off a remembrance in you of a very important verse in chapter 2, where Krishna is describing the way in which the soul is entrapped and becomes degraded in this world. And he starts out with the same phrase, Dhyayato vishayan punksa sangas teshu pajayate. So what happens if you meditate on the object of the senses? If they're attractive, you become attached. You have an attachment. That's called sangha. And sangas teshu pajayate gives rise to sangha. And if you keep contemplating and desiring and fantasizing, then that turns into kama. Kama in Sanskrit means more than sex desire. It means any powerful, impelling desire of the senses. So that attachment turns into lust or into powerful attraction. And then krama krodha vijayate. Inevitably, the kama must be frustrated at a certain point, because that's just the way the material world works. And you get frustrated and you become angry. You can become angry yourself. Say, "Oh, why did I do that? I could have done this. I could have had that. Now, she left me. Or he left her." So whatever it is, you become angry, and that krodha bhavati sammoha can lead to complete bewilderment. And Prabhupada, in this context in tape, I hear, he gives a perfect example. You do something that you regret for the rest of your life. And he gives a case that he witnessed himself, I think it was in Calcutta, of two brothers. They got so angry, maybe over, it doesn't say what, it could have been he stole a girlfriend, whatever. One brother killed the other. Horrible. And then so they arrested him. They were going to, had a trial. They were going to hang him. And the father begged the judge, "Oh, look, I've lost one son already. Please, at least don't, give him life imprisonment with it." So that was the real. They could have been perfectly normal guys, but they got caught up in this conflict and created havoc in their life. So krodha bhavati sammoha, sammohat smriti vibrama, and by that bewilderment you forget everything. You forget who you are. You forget the relationship you have with your brother. This happens all the time. Smriti brangshad, when the memory is destroyed, buddhi nasha, the intelligence becomes destroyed, then you're finished. You fall down in the material pool. So then the question arises, and I'll give this again because there's new people who didn't get. So what to do? Krishna doesn't provide, he's not just describing the evils of the material world and then goodbye, have good luck. He gives you the way out. He gives you the solution to the problem. It's undoubtedly a real problem. Raga dvesha vimuktaisthu vishayan indriyaischara, and again that word vishaya. Vishayan indriyaischara, atma vasher vidhe atma, prasadam adhigacchati. Notice the word prasadam. Prasadam, this doesn't mean spiritual food, but it means the Lord's grace. That's the main meaning of it. So what he says there, raga dvesha, this is the binding of the world. Raga is strong attachment, like lust, and dvesha is abhorrence, or the last thing you want to do. The opposite of attachment is not detachment. The opposite of attachment is abhorrence, aversion, attachment and aversion. Very important to understand that, because they're both binding, they're both illusory. To be averse of so many things in this world, to hate someone, that's just as much maya as to be passionate or to be addicted to something. It's just the other side of the coin. So here it says, raga dvesha vimukta. You can become free of attachment and aversion, even while the senses are moving amongst the sense objects. In other words, you're seeing things that would normally be attractive, hearing things and all that. The attractive nature is there, and your senses are still there, but you're free of the attachment and the aversion. How does that? How? Atma Varshaya, self-control, brought about by Videyatma, by the soul, by following the vidis, by the do's and the don'ts of sadhana bhakti. Videyatma, which are in the Shastra. Then prasadam adhigacchati. Then you get the mercy of the Lord, and prasade savadukkanam hanir. By that mercy of the Lord, by that grace of the Lord, all of your sufferings are eradicated. So you become naturally joyful. You're in the Brahma Bhuta platform. Buddhi paya batisthate, your intelligence is fixed in this transcendence. So he's describing bhakti. This is right at the beginning, when Krishna starts his instruction. This is a theme throughout the Bhagavad Gita. He's describing to Arjuna. It basically says you're a fool. You seem to be speaking learned words. If you remember in the first chapter, second chapter, beginning, he's quoting the Vedas. The Vedas say when the family traditions are lost, if I kill the husband, the women will be unprotected. Then they'll go to hell. I'll go to hell by this sinful activity. In other words, he's got some Vedic. He's quoting the Vedas there. Seemingly he's a pundit, but Krishna says, "You're no pundit. You're lamenting for what is not lamentable, the physical body. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead." In other words, you're not really a pundit. So he's chastising. Then in a few verses, he's saying, I think there's one more verse. He says a key verse, never was there a time when I did not exist. Now, people don't usually speak like that. Of course there was a time. I was born in 1947. I didn't exist before then. Yes, you did. Your body was born, but you're not the body. That's his whole point, right? So, this is a festival of double negatives. Natve vaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadaba. Never was a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. We're all eternal. Just the body keeps changing. This is the first thing. So then, famous verse that usually, if you're going to memorize verses, it's the first one you memorize. Dehinosmin yada dehe kaumaram yovanang jada tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. That the embodied living soul is passing in this very body from childhood to youth, adolescence, middle age, old age, and then finally gets another body at death. Those who are sober, the dhiras, are not bewildered by such a change. Now, this is, again, forgive me, but I just have to again go into the editorial, how important that is. Prabhupada said, he typed, second chapter he typed out, there's no question of the first 5 chapters he typed of the Gita. Then they got him the dictaphone. It was right at the beginning. And he said, the sober-minded are not bewildered by such a change. And somehow our first editor, I'm not going to explain the whole ins and outs, he made it the self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. Well, I and everyone else who read that thought that refers to the person who's dying. Right? The soul is there and the body's dying, but if you're Krishna conscious, you're self-realized, you'll be able to take it with equanimity because you're not dying. Right? I mean, that's the idea. But that's not what it means. The dhira, the sober-minded, is Arjuna. The problem is he is the one who's upset about the prospect of his guru dying, his grandfather Bhishma Dev, Dronacharya, and all his friends and relatives, and him being responsible for it, being to a good part. So that really couldn't abide. So Krishna is just telling him, nobody dies. The soul is passing through the body, and everyone's going to die eventually, including you. And if you're sober-minded, then you won't be disturbed. And then he says the verse about tolerance, right? In other words, you will be disturbed. When Prabhupada left his body, the whole movement was disturbed. Everyone was distraught, even though we knew that he would back to God, and no question was leaving. But the separation, that's the thing. And so there's going to be pain because you have a relationship with some, even devotees, but you have to be dhira. You have to be able to be sober-minded and not let it completely throw you off completely. So he said, matra sparshatsa konteya, is that the coming and going of pleasurable and painful things. This is the nature of the material world, and you have to tolerate. You have to tolerate, the dualities of this world. And then he says something. Vijay said this was a very important verse that when he first started reading the Gita, where he saw the significance of it. Yaminabdhyantete purusham purushashaba samaduka sukham dhiram so amritatvaya kalpate. There's that word dhira again. Says those only those who can remain undisturbed in the dualities of this world. But the purusham purushashaba. He addresses Arjuna as the best of men. Samaduka sukham dhiram. Mean equal poised in happiness and distress, they are eligible for liberation. In other words, that's a primary state of mind that you need to cultivate. Realize this world is full of dualities, but you become fixed enough in Krishna consciousness so you can tolerate and take it all in and not let it throw you completely off. So that's important. So back to our verses here, where Krishna is talking about the Uttama Purusha, the Paramatma. So remember, we had a key verse just a few verses back, which I almost was going to read it again. It's so important. It's practically the most famous one. There's 2 really famous verses in this chapter. 15:7. Mamai Vangsho Jiva Loka Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Who are we? We are the Anksha of Krishna. Krishna claims us of his own. Anksha means a particle or a minute particle that has the qualities of the big unit, the drop of water in the ocean, the ray of sunshine, like that. So we have Krishna's qualities. We're qualitative, at least 50 of them. I mean, we can't create universes. Maybe you can. I like it. But at least the first 50. So we have these qualities in minute degree, Jiva Bhuta Monakshashtan, but we're struggling very hard with the 6 senses that include the mind, and then he describes transmigration. So that's the first one. And then the perhaps even more famous is Sarvasya chaham vidisannivishto mattak smriti jnanam apohanamcha. Vedaischa sarva ahameva vejo vedanta kridin veda vedeva chaham. So, he's describing himself as the super soul there. And that's what the chapter is about, the Supreme Person. But this verse is, Sarvasya chaham, I am situated in the heart of every living entity. Let's say every organism. The organism means a body with a soul in it, right? It can be human or non-human. He's there in the heart of the plants and the insects too, also giving them their little, they say, what's the saying? There's a saying how these animals know what to do. I forget. There's a statement by, not intuition, by instinct. Thank you, instinct. There's no instinct. The super soul is telling them, do this, go there, do that. You're directing them. Anyway, so I am in the hearts of everyone. Chaham Riddhi Sannibishto, and from me come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. It's a very key understanding. When you lose your car keys, or misplace them, and you're dredging your mind, where did I last see them? Let me be right. It's kind of prayer. Please, mind or intelligence, help me. And that's the way Krishna instructs us, through our intelligence. And so, very importantly, because he's trying to give us good instruction, but we are not taking it. So he comes externally as the spiritual master. In this case, he's both the spiritual master and the original Krishna. But for us, he's coming as the spiritual master, spiritual masters, sadhus, and the guru, and the shastra. He's coming here as the Bhagavad Gita. These are the words of the super soul. Krishna says, I am the super soul. He's speaking here. If we accept it and take it, then it's just as good as getting the direct instruction from the super soul. And if we actually follow the principles, we will be able to feel the direction of the Lord. So it's all very inspiring. And here he's just saying, going from, yes, in third person to first person, and I think he stays in the first person for the rest. Yes. And he's winding up now. Okay, any discussion on any of these points? Yes, Brajamandala. Wait a minute. I'm sorry?
Just a quick comment.
Okay.
Thanks for giving us the history of Baladev Vijayabhushan and the commentary of the Vedas. I've never heard that before, so it was really interesting. So I just wanted to say thank you for in the beginning of the class. It was really nice to hear.
Okay. And some of these verses like that, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam, which is the last purport that we read, Prabhupada quote those all the time. It's like something you can relate to because it's describing how we're living. It said, of all the eternal conscious living beings, there's one who's very special. And what's so special about him? There's many things, but this is the one thing. He's providing the necessities for all the others. So that gives us, there can only be one of those, and it should be, Thanksgiving, right? Isn't what Thanksgiving is? It's supposed to be grateful at every moment, every breath. We went through this pandemic, and we think how fortunate we are to be able to take an easy breath and breathe. Right? Remember how that was? It was kind of a unique experience I had because you realize everybody in the world is thinking about this. Maybe it'll come here. And it did go, to Africa, India, Europe, everywhere. And here suddenly, what you always take for granted, is, that your next breath, you can't take it for granted. Death is, really, and I remember we had people joining, who were very good guests for a long time. And then, there's Glenn, who's now Govardhan, he was coming, doing serious service, all the time. He had his brother, who would also do service, his twin brother. But then when that pandemic happened, it was like a few weeks in, I'm going to take full shelter, So this is actually one of the preaching points. Krishna says, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. one of the principles of knowledge, that's is foundational, is to be aware of the evils. Evils means the dangers of birth, old age, disease, and death. And Prabhupada sometimes said, we should live as if we're going to maybe die at any moment. What's this business? Always to chant, always chant, always chant. Right? Amanamana kirtaniya sadahari. Kirtaniya sadahari. To always be singing and thinking the holy name. Who knows when that last moment will come? So that's what the great souls are. They are constantly Krishna, 24 hours. It's practically inconceivable. But that's what Krishna consciousness is all about. Remember that there's one verse that describes what all the other principles serve. Smartavyak satatam vishnor. Vismartavyo najatu chit. Sava vidhi, is that word vidhi again. Sava vidhi nishedaksur eteyor avakinkara. A very, very wonderful verse, metaphorical. So, smartavyak satatam vishnu. Who can say what that means?
Always remember Vishnu.
Yeah, always remember Vishnu. And when Prabhupada would quote this verse, I think in the book sometimes, yes, and the original Vishnu form is Krishna. In other words, always think of Krishna. And Vismartavya najatu chit. Any ideas? Okay, smartavya means to always remember. Vismartavya, just the opposite, forgetting. And Vismartavya na jatu chit, at no time forget him. Now I explained this before, but I'll explain it again because it's very illuminating. It said, when I first read it, I said, well, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? I mean, always remember and never forget, aren't they equivalent? No. They're not equivalent. We do so many things to help us remember. Chanting japa, chanting kirtan together, reading the Bhagavad Gita, seeing the deities. So that's all great. But then we have to not do those things which help us forget. That's why we're here. We wanted to forget. We can't be remembering Krishna all the time and then try to enjoy what belongs to him, right? Then we'll feel like thieves. So no, we have to forget all about Krishna and then we can try to enjoy this duality. So we're kind of falling from our spiritual world every day, right? Otherwise we'd all be pure devotees. So we have to religiously, very determinedly do those things that help us remember Krishna, so it becomes habitual. And we have to give up those things that help us forget Krishna. And that's, and all the other, everything else we do is servants of these two. What are we doing here? We're learning how to remember Krishna. We're hearing Krishna speak. This is very auspicious for helping us to remember Krishna. Buddha speak of the kirtan, the deities, you can see it. And we're given knowledge to help us avoid those things that will, induce us to forget Krishna. And there's one verse that sticks out in my mind it's not often quoted, from the 3rd chapter. Because the main way in which we remember Krishna is obviously through the sound. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is sound, the holy name is sound. These paintings and everything manifests from sound, from the ideas and the images and the pastimes. That's all coming through the sound, and it manifests externally, so we can also see. So this is all about those words. It's in the 3rd chapter, in chapter 9, I believe. It's a description of the kingdom of God, and Brahma is describing who goes and who doesn't get to go. So this verse, this 5, describes who doesn't get to go to Vaikuntha. Yanna vajant agabedor Rachananubharat chinvandiye annivishaya kukata. There's that word vishaya. Vishaya means the objects of the senses and also subject matters for reading or speaking. Yan navrajant agabedo rachananubharat chinvandiye nivishaya kukata matignir yastu shuta hatabhagar nibadata saras tang tang chapanta shadaneshu tamaksu hanta. The last word is hanta, alas, of this verse. So Brahma is saying, they don't get to go to Vaikuntha who Instead of hearing words describing and glorifying the pastimes of Krishna, who is the destroyer of sinful reaction, agabida, vachananavada, trinvanti, they hear andivishaya, sounds which have as their subject matter other than Krishna's glories. Kukata, the Krishna Katha is great, but Kukata means mundane. Matigni, which destroys the intelligence. Yastu Shuta, hearing those subject matters and hearing those sound vibrations. Hatabagaya, for all human beings, nribhi or naras, destroys their good fortune. Hatabagaya, but atasaras. Atasaras means destroys your interest in the transcendence. Steals away your good fortune of having some interest in Krishna consciousness. And tang, those subject matters, those hearing, tang chapanti, throws down the living entity, the human being. Tapan ashadaneshu, without a shelter. Tamaksu, in darkness, alas. Very dramatic. It's all in the sound. You should try to hear and study these transcendental sounds as much as possible and avoid mundane sounds, words. All right, we have time for another one, at least. So this is another really nice wrap-up verse, second to last verse. Yomam evama sambudho janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajati mam sarvabhavena bharata. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without doubting, is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharat. Purport. There are many philosophical speculations about the constitutional position of the living entities and the Supreme Absolute Truth. Now, in this verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead clearly explains that anyone who knows Lord Krishna to be the Supreme Person is actually the knower of everything. The imperfect knower goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth. But the perfect knower, without wasting his valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness, the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Throughout the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step. And still, there are so many stubborn commentators on the Bhagavad Gita who consider the Supreme Absolute Truth and the living entities to be one and the same. Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, learning by oral reception. One should actually receive the Vedic message from authorities like Krishna and his representatives. Here Krishna distinguishes everything very nicely, and one should hear from this source. Simply to hear like the hogs is not sufficient. One must be able to understand from the authorities. It is not that one should simply speculate academically. One should submissively hear from the Bhagavad Gita that these living entities are always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anyone who is able to understand this, according to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, knows the purpose of the Vedas. There we are again. I think it's the purport of the Vedas. No one else knows the purport of the Vedas. The word bhajati is very significant. In many places, the word bhajati is expressed in relationship with the service of the Supreme Lord. If a person is engaged in full Krishna consciousness, in the devotional service of the Lord, it is to be understood that he has understood all the Vedic knowledge. In the Vaishnava Parampara, it is said that if one is engaged in the devotional service of Krishna, then there is no need for any other spiritual process for understanding the Supreme Absolute Truth. He has already come to the point because he is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. He has ended all preliminary processes of understanding. But if anyone, after speculating for hundreds of thousands of lives, does not come to the point that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that one has to surrender there, all the speculation for so many years and lives is a useless waste of time. Hare Krishna. Wow. So this useless waste of time, it comes up right at the beginning of the Bhagavatam. when we have in the second chapter, these famous verses beginning with Savai Pungsang Paro Dharma, what is the real Dharma? This is the question. What is that Dharma by which the living entities can become truly happy, forever, eternally? That was the question that the sages put to Sutta Goswami. And so it's second chapter. And I was thinking, well, this is very wise. 18,000 verses is a lot. And when you add the commentaries and all, you may not get through it all. So even if they just get to the second chapter, and it's not even at the end of the second chapter, it's right near the beginning, it's starting at 60. And they read like 20 verses, they'll get a full lesson in Krishna consciousness. So right there he talks about this, useless labor. So he starts out describing what real Dharma is. That real Dharma which can bring real happiness, lasting joy, eternal happiness for the soul. Savai Pangsang Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktir Arhokshaje Hahaitukya Pratihita Yeyatma Supersedity. Supersedity means blissful, becomes certainly. So that is the supreme Dharma for the human being. Savai Pangsang Paro Dharma Yato Bhaktir Arhokshaje, which engenders, which results in bhakti, devotional service to Arhokshaja, the transcendent Lord. It doesn't have a name yet in our state, right? Arhokshaja, he was beyond the sense. Such devotional service must be unmotivated, means not motivated by any material desire, but simply by love, and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. And then the next thing he said, well, and there's so many benefits just to doing this bhakti. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayat Yashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayadhoitikam. Very quickly, when one begins this process, not just at the end, it generates quickly detachment and knowledge. They go together. Detachment from the things that are binding us, all of these material desires, and knowledge of who we are and so forth. And then the next verse is the one I was aiming for. Dharmak svanutitak pungsham vishrakshena katasuyak notpadi yadidachim shamayevahi kevalam. That phrase shamayevahi kevalam, which appears elsewhere in the Gita, in the Bhagavatam also, means completely useless labor. A lot of labor for nothing. So what is that? He says, if your so-called Dharma, or your Dharma within the Varnashram Dharma system, that's what he talks about, su-anushtita. It's not svanushtita, but it's su-anushtita, means very nicely performing all my duties in Varnashram, Brahman, Vaishna, Shudra, all that. But those activities are not engendering in you an increasing desire to hear about God and hear about Krishna, then Shrama Evahi Kevalam. It's a lot of labor for nothing. You can be the most perfect Brahman, Vaishya, and everything. But if you're not getting more attracted to hear about Krishna, that's a big mistake. Because that will, if you are attracted, then that hearing will result in remembrance. You sharpen that sword of remembrance. And that will cut the bonds, the knots in the heart that are binding us here. So that attraction for hearing means attraction for Krishna. Especially if, all the only verse you know is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Ram, Hare. That's enough. If you can become so attracted to chanting that it's just like nectar, because it really is nectar. Maruna Maruna Meta Mangalam Mangalanam Sakladangam Avalli Satpalam Chitswarupam Sakadari Padigitam Shraddaya Helayava Bhukavadandana Matram Tari Krishna Nama. Of sweet things, it's the sweetest you will taste at any time. Of things that bring good fortune, it's the perfect paradigm. Of all the Vedic writings, it's the transcendental fruit, the very form of spirit, unalloyed and absolute. When uttered even once with faith, or uttered once with none, from birth and death it truly will deliver anyone. And in the end, it brings pure love for Krishna, life's true aim. So cast away all doubt and chant Shri Krishna's holy name. So the Hare Krishna Raj is absolutely sufficient if we can get attraction. But all these other verses and all these other descriptions and all these other activities are meant to increase our attraction for chanting the holy name and hearing all these other descriptions and things. And that's the safest path. Because Krishna manifests in sound, divinity in sound. That's the holy name. So, thank you for listening. I think we're out of time. Did you have a question? Okay. You have a question? Okay, real quick.
Is there any benefit through going through just the motions in bhakti, or do the motions have to be with intent?
There's definitely benefit. Any contact you have with devotees or with the holy name, even just one time, is extremely beneficial. But if you really want to try to go back to Godhead or make progress, then we need to be serious about progressing in devotional service, and it means becoming serious about the process and surrendering. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya bharjanam. Those are the two elements of surrender: accepting those things favorable and rejecting those things unfavorable. So yes, it's beneficial. We should never stop chanting. We say, well, it didn't work in this lifetime. Do 2 rounds a day. Don't give it up. It's the most auspicious thing. And yeah, any little thing we do. I mean, Prabhupada said, some baby who doesn't even understand the first thing, he's trying to dance an arti. Oh, very auspicious. You're a very fortunate child. It counts. It goes into his account. All right, we have to adjourn, and we'll resume next Monday for the last 2 verses. Oh, last verse? Last verse, okay. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.